The scent of pine and cinnamon filled my living room. A festive lie I told myself every year. I smoothed the silver foil over the box containing Michael's vintage watch, pretending he might actually visit to claim it. Then my phone buzzed against the mahogany table. My son wrote, "Don't come to our house for Christmas. My wife is against you." I smiled. He didn't know that their house had belonged to me. I had to survive the silence of the afternoon before that satisfaction arrived. That evening, he stood at my door. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Our house. The audacity of those two words nearly made me laugh. 5 years ago, I had signed the deed, paid the down payment, and handed them the keys with a mother's naive hope. I told them to build their credit, never asking for a dime in rent. In return, I received calls that dwindled to texts, and now, a banishment from the very roof I provided. The silver wrapping paper suddenly looked like cheap trash. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the mechanism. Michael hadn't even called. He hid behind a text message, likely dictated by Jade, while she stood over his shoulder. I pictured her tight, mechanical smile and the way she used to call me Mom, only when she needed money. He had thrown his own mother away for a woman he'd known for 6 years, forgetting the decades I spent scrubbing floors to give him that life. Something inside my chest didn't break, it turned to ice. My grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought I was a helpless old woman who would weep into her herbal tea. They forgot who I was before I was a grandmother. I walked to my study, my steps echoing on the hardwood. I unlocked the filing cabinet and pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Property 404. The deed was there. My name was the only one on the title. They were guests who had mistaken hospitality for ownership. It was time to correct them. I sat at my desk and opened the banking app first. Every mortgage payment for the last 60 months had come from my account. 0 contribution from them. I returned to Michael's text thread. I didn't type a plea. I didn't ask why. I typed 3 sentences. Since I am not welcome in my property, neither are you. You have 30 days to vacate. Consider this your official notice. I pressed send. The swoosh sound was louder than a cannon shot in the silent room. The aftermath was mathematically precise. I knew exactly how long it took to drive from their subdivision to my driveway. I made a pot of Earl Grey tea, the steam rising in lazy spirals. I smoothed my cardigan and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked calm. I looked ready. 53 minutes later, tires screeched against the asphalt outside. A car door slammed with violent force. My son was here, and he was about to learn that rent-free living came with a price tag. Michael didn't just knock. He battered the wood like a SWAT team conducting a raid. I watched the door shudder in its frame, counting the strikes before I finally turned the lock. He burst in wild-eyed and breathless, stumbling over the threshold like a drunk man. Mom, what the hell? You can't just evict us? His voice cracked on the last syllable, high and childish. The cold December air rushed in behind him, chilling my ankles. I closed the door softly. Take off your shoes, Michael, I said, my voice dangerously level. You are tracking mud onto the carpet. He froze. Blinking, rapidly as if I were speaking a foreign language. The disparity between his red-faced panic and my requested domestic order threw him off balance. He kicked off his loafers, his hands shaking violently. This isn't funny, he hissed, pacing the hallway. Jade is crying her eyes out. You sent that text and she literally collapsed. He wanted me to feel guilt, I only felt distance. I walked past him into the kitchen, the linoleum cool beneath my slippers. I imagine she is upset, I replied, reaching for the kettle. Eviction is a stressful legal proceeding. I poured the boiling water over the tea bag, watching the dark stain spread. But state law requires 30 days' notice, which I have generously provided. Michael followed me, invading my space, looming over the counter. Legal proceeding. Mom, we're family. You don't sue family because of one stupid text message. One text message. I turned to face him, leaning my hip against the granite counter. It has been 5 years of missed calls, canceled holidays, and disrespect. That text was simply the signature on the contract you wrote. He raked his fingers through his hair, a nervous tic from childhood. Jade is stressed. She just quit her job to start her business. We don't have savings for a deposit right now. The admission hung in the air, heavy and embarrassing. That sounds like a personal financial problem, I said, taking a sip of tea. The ceramic was hot against my lip. Perhaps you should have considered your liquidity before banning your landlord from the premises. Michael stopped pacing. His brow furrowed, twisting his face into genuine confusion. Landlord. Mom, stop saying that. It's our house. We've lived there for 5 years. We made it a home. The delusion was complete. He honestly believed my generosity had somehow transferred the title. I set the mug down with a deliberate clink. Michael. Who pays the property taxes? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Who is on the deed? He looked away, focusing on the refrigerator magnets. Jade said. She said after 5 years, common law makes it ours. My stomach churned. This wasn't just entitlement, this was calculated misinformation. His wife hadn't just isolated him, she had rewritten reality to steal my asset. He was a pawn in her long game. Jade is wrong, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And if you don't vacate by January 23rd, the sheriff will explain property law to both of you. Michael stepped back, looking at me like a stranger. You'd really do that? I already did. I pointed to the door. Go home to your wife, Michael. You have packing to do. He left without his coat. But the silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet before a siege. The morning of December 26th was gray and biting. I pulled into the driveway of the bungalow, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Beside me, Miller, a contractor I'd trusted for 20 years, adjusted his glasses and checked his clipboard. I had sent a text notifying Michael of a landlord inspection 24 hours ago, strictly following the statute. No reply came. I approached the front door, my breath clouding in the air, praying my spare key still turned the lock. It slid in smoothly. The door swung open, revealing a space I didn't recognize. The foyer, once separated by a charming archway, now gaped open like a wound. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through uncurtained windows. Good Lord. Miller muttered, stepping past me. Where the central supporting wall used to stand. There was now nothing. Just a vast, echoing emptiness filled with cheap laminate flooring. They had wanted an open concept. They had created a structural nightmare. The ceiling sagged visibly in the center. Miller walked to the center of the room, looking up with a grim expression. He pulled out a laser measure and aimed it at the drooping plaster. That was a load-bearing wall. Hadley, he said, his voice flat. The beam they put in, if they even put one in, isn't holding the weight. He pointed to hairline cracks spiderwebbing across the ceiling. One heavy snow load. And this roof comes down. My knees felt weak. They hadn't just redecorated, they had endangered their lives. I navigated around a pile of unopened mail on the counter, spotting final notices for bills I'd never seen. Miller was already in the kitchen, crouching by the sink. You need to see this? He called out. I joined him. The smell of damp earth hitting me instantly. The cabinet doors were warped and swollen. He shone his flashlight under the pipes. A pool of stagnant water reflected the beam. Amateur plumbing, he diagnosed. They used the wrong fittings. It's been leaking for months. We moved to the master bathroom, the pride of Jade's Instagram feed. The tile work looked flashy from a distance, bright turquoise and gold. But up close, the grout was cracking and uneven. Miller tapped a hollow, sounding tile near the tub. Hear that? He took a small utility knife and pried at the edge. The tile popped off with disturbing ease. Behind it, the drywall was black and slick with slime. Black mold. I whispered, covering my nose and mouth instinctively. Miller stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, as if the house itself were contagious. I need to open up these walls to see how far the rot goes, he said. But just looking at this. You are looking at 40, maybe 50,000 in repairs. And that is before we address the structural stabilization. I leaned against the doorframe for support. $40,000. The equity I had built over 30 years had been gutted by their arrogance and incompetence. Did they pull any permits? I asked, though I knew the answer. Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Not a chance. The city would have shut this down day one. I walked back to the living room, my anger turning into a cold, terrifying resolve. On the floor, amidst the dust, I saw a crumpled sketch on a napkin. It was labeled, Dream Flip. They weren't making a home. They were trying to flip my house for profit behind my back. I was barely back in my own kitchen when the phone rang. The caller ID flashed, Jade, like a warning light. My hand shook as I swiped answer. You broke into our home. She screamed, no greeting, just pure venom. I conducted a lawful inspection. I replied, staring at the contractor's grim estimate on the counter. I found the mold, Jade. And the missing wall. Silence stretched on the line, heavy and guilty. Then came the pivot. You'll regret this, Hadley. 10 minutes later, my notification feed exploded. A link arrived from a distant cousin. I clicked it, my stomach twisting. It was a video of Jade tear, stained and shivering in a coat, standing outside her front door. My mother-in-law is evicting us, she sobbed to the camera. In the middle of winter. Just because we ask for boundaries. The comments scrolled by in a blur of hate. Monster. Abuser. She had weaponized my silence against me. The shame was a physical weight, pressing me into my kitchen chair. I wanted to reply. To post photos of the black mold and the sagging ceiling, but my fingers froze. Who would believe the landlord over the weeping young wife? I reached for my phone to call Michael, to beg him to stop this madness. Maybe I should just drop the eviction. I was halfway to typing, I surrender, when the doorbell rang, sharp and demanding. It wasn't the police. I opened the door to find Margaret, my neighbor of 20 years, holding a foil-wrapped casserole. She didn't look at me with the disgust I saw in the comments. She looked furious, but not at me. I saw the video, she said, marching past me into the hallway. That girl has nerve. I blinked. Margaret, did you read the comments? They think I am a monster. She set the dish down hard. Strangers think that. The neighborhood knows better. Margaret pulled up a chair and unlocked her phone. Hadley? Look at the local group chat. She scrolled through messages I never knew existed. Neighbors complaining about Jade's loud parties, the trash left on the lawn, and the way she screamed at delivery drivers. We've been waiting for you to kick them out, Margaret admitted. We didn't want to hurt your feelings. But that girl is poison. The isolation Jade had forced on me had hidden the truth for years. I looked at the casserole, chicken and broccoli. My favorite, and then back at the hate-filled screen of my phone. The contrast was startling. Jade had constructed a digital fantasy where she was the victim. But in the real world, she was a nuisance. I wasn't the lonely, bitter woman she painted me to be. I had a community. I had witnesses. And most importantly, I had the structural report on the counter. The tears in my eyes dried instantly. She wants a public battle, I asked, picking up my phone again. Then I will give her the truth. I didn't comment on her video. Instead, I dialed the number for a private investigator Margaret had recommended years ago for a cheating spouse. If Jade was lying about the dream home, what else was she lying about? I need a full background check, I told the voice on the other end. Name is Jade. And dig deep. The investigator's office smelled of stale coffee. Vance didn't look up as I slid the check across his scarred desk. Jade Morrison. He muttered, typing the name into a terminal that looked older than my son. Give me 48 hours. I nodded, fighting a wave of guilt. Was I really investigating my daughter-in-law? Then I remembered the black mold and the viral video. Find everything, I said. Debs, lawsuits, previous addresses. Vance finally looked up, his eyes cold. You won't like the answer. 2 days of silence followed. I sat in my living room, the grandfather clock marking time like a slow heartbeat. The rain lashed against the windows. Then, a car door slammed. I peered through the sheer curtains to see Jade walking up the path alone. No Michael. No camera crew. She stood on the porch, looking small and drenched, shivering in a thin coat. It was a perfect image of contrition. I hesitated at the heavy wood door. Was this a truce or a trap? I unlocked it slowly. Mom, she whispered, her mascara running in tragic streaks. I am so sorry. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and shaking off the rain. I don't know what happened. The stress, the business failing. I just snapped. She sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. Michael misses you. I miss you. We can't let a house destroy our family. Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. It was a compelling performance. A month ago, I would have hugged her. Today, I just watched her hands. We found a contractor, she said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. My uncle. He can fix the wall for cheap. We'll pay for it over time. She looked up, eyes wide and pleading. Just drop the eviction. Please. If we have an eviction on our record, we can never rent anywhere decent again. She reached for my hand, her skin clammy. Let us make it right. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a solution. But deep down it felt like a bribe. I pulled my hand away. The wall is structural, Jade. It isn't about money. I leaned forward, catching her gaze. It is about the disrespect. You banned me from my own property. The tears stopped instantly. She blinked, recalibrating. I told you. I was stressed. No. I corrected her. You were controlling. I took a breath. Here is my condition. If I drop the eviction, you will publicly apologize for the video. I get a key. The air in the room shifted. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. A muscle in her jaw twitched. For a split second, the grieving daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by something feral. A key. She repeated, her voice tight. We need our privacy, Hadley. You can't just barge in. It is my house. I reminded her. And a public apology is non-negotiable. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her purse. You just want to humiliate me, she hissed. You want to win. The mask had slipped completely. She didn't want a home. She wanted a fortress where she could rule without oversight. I'll see you in court? She spat, marching to the door. She didn't look back. As her taillights faded into the rain, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Vance. I hope you are sitting down. He rasped, his voice sounding tinny through the speaker. I found your daughter-in-law's records from Arizona. My heart hammered against my ribs. What is it? I asked. She didn't just have a failed business. She has 3 aliases and an outstanding warrant for embezzlement. The trap had snapped shut. I set the table like a surgeon preparing for an operation. The thick manila envelope sat in the center, a paper bomb waiting to detonate. I had texted Michael to come alone, specifying that this concerned his financial future, not our family drama. But when the headlights swept across my front window, I saw 2 silhouettes in the front seat. He had brought her. Of course he had. She was his shadow, his mouthpiece, and his jailer. I opened the door before they knocked, my face a mask of stone. They walked in with a united front that looked rehearsed and fragile. Michael looked exhausted, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. While Jade wore a defiant smirk. She clung to his arm as if the floor were made of lava. If you have something to say, you say it to both of us, Michael announced, reciting the script she had likely fed him in the car. He didn't sit down. He stood there, vibrating with a nervous energy that made me want to weep for the boy he used to be. I asked you to come alone for your own protection, I said, my voice devoid of the warmth he expected. I walked to the table and placed my hand on the dossier. But since she is here, she can explain the Arizona warrants herself. I slid the folder across the mahogany. It spun slightly, stopping inches from Michael's hand. Jade stiffened beside him, her smirk faltering for the first time. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of secrets about to be grounded. Michael frowned, looking from the folder to me, confusion warring with his anger. Arizona. We've never been to Arizona. He opened the cover, and I watched his eyes scan the first page. It was a mugshot, unflattering and harsh, dating back 7 years. Who is Sarah Jenkins? He whispered, the blood draining from his face. That is your wife, I answered softly. Or at least, that was her name before the embezzlement charges at the marketing firm in Phoenix. The paper crinkled under his tightening grip. Jade lunged forward, trying to snatch the paper away, but Michael pulled it back. It's a mistake? She shrilled, her voice climbing an octave. My identity was stolen years ago. Your mother is digging up dirt that doesn't exist to break us up. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sweater. Baby, look at me. You know me. I am your wife. For a second, he wavered. The habit of believing her was a deep rut in his mind, worn smooth by years of manipulation. Turn the page, I commanded, ignoring her theatrics. He obeyed mechanically. The next sheet detailed the credit card fraud and the $60,000 in secret debt she was currently carrying. She didn't quit her job to start a business, I said, delivering the blow with surgical precision. She was fired for diverting client funds into a personal account. Michael looked at Jade, his eyes wide and wet. You told me the market was down, he stammered. You told me we were investing in our future. I was? Jade screamed, her panic turning into rage. I was fixing our credit so we could buy this dump. I pointed to the final document in the stack. It was a log of her internet search history from the shared iPad she thought I couldn't access during the inspection. Read the search terms, Michael. He read them aloud, his voice hollow. Adverse possession laws state how long to claim squatters' rights, how to transfer deed without owner consent. The silence that followed was absolute. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. She hadn't been isolating him out of love or protection. She had been running a clock, waiting for the legum line to expire, so she could steal my home. Michael dropped the folder as if it were burning coal. He stepped away from her, revulsion twisting his features. Jade saw the shift. She saw the game was over. The crying victim act evaporated instantly, replaced by a sneer that twisted her pretty face into something grotesque. So what? She spat, turning on me with eyes full of hate. You don't need this house. You are just a selfish old woman hoarding space, while we rot in an apartment. She stepped toward me, aggressive and wild. We deserved this house. We put in the work. We waited for you to just die already so we could finally live. But you just keep hanging on. The words hung in the air, toxic and irrevocable. She had said the quiet part out loud. Michael made a sound that was half sob, half growl. He didn't look at me, he couldn't. He looked at the woman he had married, seeing her clearly for the first time in 6 years. The monster wasn't the landlord. It was the tenant. He walked to the front door and opened it wide to the freezing night. Get out, he said. His voice was quiet, terrifyingly calm. Jade laughed, a sharp, brittle soaking. Michael didn't blink. Get out before I call the police. Jade didn't disappear into the night. She dug in like a tick. She returned to the house while Michael slept at a motel, changing the keypad code and barricading the door. She claimed tenant rights, and plastered a printed copy of the state housing code on the front window with duct tape. It was a pathetic display of power. But it was effective. The police refused to intervene without a court order, calling it a civil matter. I stood on the sidewalk, watching her shadow move behind the curtains of the home I paid for. 3 days before the eviction deadline, a process server handed me a thick envelope. Jade wasn't just squatting, she was suing. The lawsuit claimed unjust enrichment, arguing that her renovations had added $50,000 of value to my property. She demanded compensation for the laminate flooring and the unpermitted demolition. The audacity took my breath away. She had destroyed the structural integrity of the house, yet she wanted me to pay her for the sledgehammer she used to gut my living room. I called my lawyer, my hand shaking with a rage that felt dangerously hot. January 23rd arrived with a bitter frost that coated the lawn in white. The sheriff's deputies arrived at 9 in the morning, their boots crunching loudly on the frozen grass. Michael stood beside me near the mailbox, refusing to look at the house he had once defended. We heard shouting from inside, then the sound of glass breaking. Jade wasn't leaving with dignity. She was being dragged out, screaming about rights she had forfeited months ago. The neighbors, Margaret included, watched from behind their blinds as the deputies escorted her to her beat up sedan. The silence that followed her departure was eerie. The sheriff gave us the all clear, and we stepped over the threshold into a disaster zone. The smell hit us first: bleach and cat urine. She had poured chemicals onto the carpets in a final act of spite. The walls were marred with black marker, scribbled with insults I couldn't bear to read. Michael walked into the kitchen and stopped dead. The appliances were gone. She had sold the stove and the refrigerator, ripping them out and leaving gaping holes in the custom cabinetry. The court hearing 2 weeks later felt like a funeral for the past 5 years. The courtroom was sterile and smelled of floor wax. Jade sat at the plaintiff's table. Dressed in a modest suit I knew she had bought on credit. She looked confident, whispering to a lawyer who looked like he chased ambulances for sport. She was banking on a settlement, convinced I would pay to make her go away. I sat straight, my back not touching the bench, clutching the binder containing Miller's structural engineering report and the contractor's estimate. Her attorney painted a picture of a young couple investing their heart and sweat equity into a family home, only to be tossed out by a greedy matriarch. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He didn't use adjectives, he used photographs. He showed the judge the load-bearing wall that was missing. He showed the black mold behind the tiles. He presented the invoice for $43,000 in necessary repairs to prevent the roof from collapsing. The judge's expression shifted from polite interest to deep, furrowed concern as he reviewed the evidence. "This isn't an improvement," the judge stated, holding up a photo of the dangerously sagging ceiling. "This is destruction of property." He looked over his glasses at Jade, who was suddenly shrinking in her seat. The ruling was swift and brutal. Not only was her lawsuit for compensation dismissed with prejudice, but the judge also granted my counterclaim for damages. She was ordered to pay for the repairs and my legal fees. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost of the arrogant woman who had texted me. The victory was absolute, but the reality was grim. Jade had no money to pay the judgment. As we left the courtroom, her lawyer was already packing his briefcase, looking annoyed that his contingency fee had evaporated. We heard her arguing with him in the hallway, her voice shrill and desperate. She shouted something about bankruptcy, about fleeing the state, but her threats held no weight anymore. The legal system had stripped her of her weapon. She was no longer a victim. She was a debtor with a public record of structural fraud. Michael walked me to my car, the winter sun glaring off the asphalt. He looked older than his 30 years, burdened by the wreckage of his marriage and the house he had helped destroy. "I am sorry, Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I let her do it. I watched her do it." I took his hand, squeezing it firmly. We rebuild, I said. That is what we do. But as I drove away, I checked my rearview mirror. Jade was standing on the courthouse steps, watching us leave, completely alone. I didn't repair the bungalow. The contractor's estimate was absurd, and the memories were too sore to scrub away. Instead, I listed the property as a handyman special and sold it to a developer who didn't care about the missing walls. Signing the final closing papers felt lighter than any deed I had ever held. I watched the sold sign go up from my car, feeling a strange lack of nostalgia. That structure had ceased to be a home years ago. Now, it was just capital. 2 years later, the silence in my house was peaceful. Michael arrived promptly at 5 for Sunday dinner, a ritual built from the ashes of his marriage. He looked healthier, the gray stress lines fading from his temples. He carried a bottle of merlot and artisan bread, offerings of contrition he still felt compelled to bring. "It smells amazing, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. It wasn't the needy affection of a child, but the respect of a man. I used the sale proceeds to build the glass greenhouse I had always denied myself. The humid air inside smelled of moss and vanilla, a sharp contrast to the bleach Jade had used to poison the carpets. I spent mornings tending to rare orchids, learning that some things require precise conditions to bloom. Michael joined me sometimes, his hands dirty with soil, learning the patience he had lacked before. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about roots. The ghost of the past tried to haunt me one last time on a Tuesday. My phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. "I hope you are happy. You destroyed my life." I stared at the text, remembering the fear that used to paralyze me whenever she demanded something. Jade was likely sitting in her parents' basement, nursing her grievances like a bitter drink. I didn't feel anger or the urge to justify myself. I felt absolutely nothing. I pressed delete without replying. The message vanished, just as she had from our lives. I realized then that I hadn't fought for the house. I had fought for my own existence. I had refused to be raised to make room for someone else's comfort. Michael watched me from the kitchen island, chopping vegetables. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing the shift in my posture. "Everything is perfect," I answered. And for the first time in a decade, I meant it completely. We sat on the patio as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple. Michael poured the tea, steam rising in the cool evening air. He didn't ask for money or favors. He just asked about my trip to Kyoto next month. I looked at my son, truly seeing him, and realized the war was finally over. I smiled, took a sip of the Earl Grey, and let the warmth settle deep in my chest. I was home.